Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, Retail Media Ad Spending, What's Needed to Reach the Ad Channel's Maximum Potential. I'm your host, Paul Verna, Principal Analyst at Insider Intelligence, based in New York, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Senior Analyst Max Willens, who's joining us today from our New York City studio. Hi, Max.
Hi, Paul. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. Before we get into the main presentation, I'd like to thank Criteo for making today's webinar possible, and I'd like to welcome Michael Greene, Senior Vice President of Global Strategy at Criteo. Michael is joining us also from New York. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Max.
A few things before we dive in. We have a ton of information to share, but there's no need to take notes. We'll email you a link with the slides and the recording of today's presentation. But we do want you to participate, so please use the chat window on the right of your screen to submit questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many as we can during our live Q&A. So with that, Max, let's get started.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you all for being here. Those of you who joined me in May for the H1 version of this presentation, welcome back. Those of you who are joining me for the first time, we are also quite happy to have you. As Paul said, we have a lot to get to, so we should probably get started. Just to quickly preview the agenda for today, we will go through top lines, just kind of revisions that we've made to the forecast over the past several months. A quick spoiler alert, we have revised things upward, thanks in part to some big moves that Amazon has made. We're also going to kind of go under the hood. One thing that's great about our forecasting team is that every time they update a forecast, they do their best to sort of drill a little deeper, dig a little deeper into the particulars of an ad spending channel. So we will have some new details we can share for the first time about the balance between on-site and off-site spending, between display ad spending and search ad spending in this channel. We'll also use that as an opportunity to look at how things are going for the leading companies in this channel. We have some new data to share there as well for the first time. And before we get to your questions and other parts of the presentation, we'll also dive into, what comes next. So that'll be a discussion of sub-channels, but also a look at some, increasingly pressing concerns that lots of advertisers have around issues related to measurement, to standardization, to transparency. And we'll understand and kind of explicate what those mean as far as the channel reaching its full potential. But let's get started with the big numbers. So the reality is that for any concerns that might or might not exist in retail media, this has turned into a real juggernaut. One of the main revisions that we've made to our forecast from the spring to now is we have revised our spending forecast upward, and consequently, we now expect that retail media is going to be the fastest growing ad spending channel across media over the next 5 years. It's basically never going to grow anything less than 21% through 2027. And as a result of that better than healthy growth, we now expect that by 2027, retail media is going to be in a dead heat with social media for the title of second biggest ad spending channel in all of media. So just to sort of further contextualize that, what does that mean? It means that retail media by 2027 is going to be not just bigger than traditional television or bigger than CTV or bigger than digital audio, it's going to be bigger than all of those things combined and will really only be behind, as I said, social and search. Consequently, and basically why this has happened is that we revised our forecast upward from an already quite healthy place. The two main reasons for this revision are related to Amazon, actually. So one is that Amazon's ad business continues to grow and frankly exceed the expectations of our forecasting group. And they also made a very notable announcement earlier this fall when they announced kind of as quietly as they could that they were going to introduce ads to Prime Video, which significantly changes our outlook for retail media CTV ad spending, which is something that in our previous forecast we thought would be fast growing, but would ultimately represent a very small slice of spending in this channel, and we've revised that accordingly. We now expect that there will be $4 billion spent in this channel more next year. There will be an additional $3 billion of spending in 2027. And I would say too that these revisions are not anomalous. We revised our forecast for social ad spending up as well. The ad ecosystem was kind of mired in a bit of a fog at the beginning of the year. But I do want to sort of revisit the reasons that this forecast was so strong and so rosy to begin with. So fundamentally, the reason that search and social, which are the two biggest forms of ad spending, grew so powerfully many years ago is because they were essentially monetizing transformative shifts in consumer behavior. Those shifts have largely run their course. Basically, everybody on this call uses search engines. I'm sure everybody on this call uses social media to a certain extent, but there is quite a bit of headroom left when it comes to e-commerce growth and people buying goods and services online. This is from a separate forecast that our group put together earlier this year. And by our own forecast, we expect that about 1 out of every $6 spent in US retail sales happens online today. By the end of our forecast period, we expect that to grow to 1 in 5. And some of that has to do with incremental user growth, but the lion's share of the growth is coming from existing users spending more money online. So rather than using e-com or using websites to buy some sort of specialty that you can't find in a brick and mortar location or to pay for something fairly specialized, increasingly people are turning to websites and turning to online retailers to purchase basics, to buy things that they need to buy week in and week out or month in and month out. And that, as you might expect, has put a lot more power in the hands of multi-channel retailers, your Targets, your Walmarts, your Amazons, because all that repeat visitation drives that flywheel that makes retail media so potent. More people visiting the website means more chances to serve them ads, and more transactions means more data, which allows them to target their ads more efficiently and with more potency. And frankly, also this repeat customer behavior makes the relationships that advertisers have with these RMNs even more important and even more strategically important, frankly. And this is borne out not just in the sort of top line figures, but also in this numbers that you see that show just how much ad budget retailers are grabbing. So this is data that we gathered from Epsilon, which shows the sort of percentage of ad spending that retail media accounts for. And the headline is that nearly 6 in 10 advertisers spend more than a quarter of their budgets in retail media. To break that down a little bit further, nearly 1 in 6 spend over half of their budgets in retail media. Another 40%, give or take, spend between 25 and 50%. And this is just, incredible when you consider how much of a curiosity retail media was just 3 or 4 years ago. And it's easy to sort of take figures like this one and the ones that I showed you a moment ago and conclude that retail media is just an unstoppable force that really nothing can deter or slow down. But the reality is that retail media is not invincible. This slide here is from the same report that Epsilon put together, and it shows how retail media advertisers anticipate that their spending in the channel is going to change over the next 3 years. And the thing that really made me sit up straight when I read it for the first time is that more than 40% of retail media advertisers say they expect that they will not change their spending at all in the next 3 years. If you include the share of respondents who said that they would actually drop their spending in the channel, you're talking about a full half of the respondents who are not going to raise the amount of money that they spend in this channel. And there are real important reasons for this. We'll get to them in more detail later in the presentation, but the complexity and difficulty of dealing with the fact that it's very difficult to measure this success of retail media or to compare the performance of one RMN to another, the fact that there is no standardization of ad formats, for example, from one RMN to another, the fact that just coordinating all the spend across RMNs, especially if you are using retail media to drive social extension, to do programmatic display, to do CTV buying, it just creates a headache that is really kind of unique across ad spending channels. And ironing those out will take some time, and consequently, lots of advertisers are saying, let's not spend more money until we can get this figured out. But I will also say that there is still quite a lot of healthy growth, and it's important to sort of start unpacking that. So here again are some of these numbers are new, and I'm excited to sort of get into them with you. But before I go much further, I'd like to sort of pause and talk a little bit about something that's really cool that we've been able to sort of unpack using this newest forecast. So everybody on this call knows a little bit about retail media, and I'm sure that everybody on this call understands three things to be true. One is that retail media is dominated by on-site spending, that it's dominated by search ad spending, and that it's dominated by Amazon. And all of those things are true, but one of the things that we were able to do for the first time with our forecast is show that when you take Amazon spending and you put it to the side, what you have is a separate ecosystem that functions really quite differently. So the red and blue bars on this bar chart show display ad spending and search ad spending in retail media minus Amazon. And what you can see right away is that in the non-Amazon part of this ecosystem, display and search are actually growing almost at identical paces. And in fact, next year, display ad spending is going to exceed search ad spending for retail media without Amazon. And in fact, if you take Walmart out of this picture, we'll talk more about them later, this dynamic gets even more pronounced because most of Walmart's search or retail media spending comes from search. And I bring all this up because, like I said, there are two retail media ecosystems, but one of them, Amazon's in particular, is quite a bit bigger. So these are the same numbers essentially from the previous slide, just presented in a different fashion. And I laid them out this way to sort of make clear that Amazon is whatever is bigger than an 800-pound gorilla. They account for about 75% of the spending in retail media this year. Their market share is declining, but it is declining very, very slowly. So by 2025, it's going to account for about 73%. And I share this just again to sort of underline the fact that even though there are two ecosystems, when you talk a little bit about the overall amount of spending that goes on here, Amazon's impact and influence on these numbers is considerable. So let's return to the truths that we know about retail media, and we'll talk about on-site spending. On-site is the dominant sub-channel and category of spending here, thanks largely to Amazon. These numbers actually represent a meaningful change from the numbers that we had in the spring. We now have off-site's share in 2025 a full 2 points higher than it was originally. And this is, again, I mentioned this at the top of the presentation, but this is largely due to our revisions to our CTV expectations. We now think that CTV will be a much bigger portion of spending, and consequently off-site's share will be higher relative to what it was in the springtime. Moving now on to search. Here again, what you see is that search is a dominant portion of spending in the channel, but its share is eroding more quickly, thanks in large part to the ad buyer enthusiasm for things like social extension, for things like programmatic advertising. We'll talk a little bit more about sub-channels a little bit later. I break these numbers out here too, again, not only to sort of talk about the sort of shifting balance between search and display, but also because it gives you an opportunity to reflect on just how massive both of these subcategories are on their own. We're talking about more than $40 billion of display ad spending in 2027. We're talking about more than $60 billion of search ad spending in 2027. And I wanted to break those things out because it allows us to sort of reflect again on the size and importance of each of retail media's component parts. So let's start with search. By next year, Amazon and Walmart combined are going to account for more than a quarter of US search ad spending. It is not a coincidence that in that same year, Google's share of the US search market will drop below 50%. These are things that I think would have just been unthinkable just a couple of years ago. And it reflects, again, not only the sort of growing importance of search to e-com, but also the power that digital scale offers to someone like a Walmart. Looking at display from a slightly different angle, here again, I think that it gets less oxygen because it is the weaker spending channel, but the scope and size of retail media display is really pretty incredible, thanks in large part to the first-party data that so many RMNs sit on top of. So here we have two bars. The gray bar represents retail media display ad spending. The light gray bar represents publishers' programmatic display revenues. So think about ads that get placed on, the New York Times, ESPN, places like that. By 2024, retail media display ad spending will exceed that total. By 2025, it will be 15% higher, and that balance is going to continue to grow, thanks in large part to the not only the growing importance of RMN first-party data, but also the deprecation of third-party cookies, which is eventually going to happen if Google is to be believed.
And Max, since our definition of display includes video, as does the IAB's, do you have a sense of how much of that retail media display component is made up of video? I know we probably don't have the video portion for publishers, but what about within our forecasts?
Yeah, it's a really, really great point. I'm glad you flagged that. So CTV does play a role here, but it only accounts for about 20% of the retail media display ad spending. So, 80% is still essentially banners, video ads, the kinds of things that, were once or remain integral to the fortunes of web publishers. So it's important to sort of underline that. So this is also, I think, a good segue into talking about the companies that are benefiting from all this spending. I have talked an awful lot about Amazon so far, but we're going to talk a little bit more about Amazon now because they are the market leader. So here again, at a high level, is the spending that Amazon gets via advertising. And as you see, again, like you'll note the similarity between what you see here and what you saw a couple slides earlier. It's dominated by search and will remain dominated by search for the foreseeable future. But it's worth lingering here again on, I broke out search and display here because it's worth lingering on just how massive Amazon's display business is. By 2025, Amazon's going to account for nearly 10% of the display ad spending in the United States. CTV is going to play a major part of it, but they also, have lots and lots of video advertising. They have tremendous upside in that part of the market. And I think, again, I am going to talk about companies besides Amazon, I promise, but I do want to take one last moment to sort of linger on the dominance that Amazon has in this channel and contextualize and compare it to what you see in other ad spending channels. So here up at the top in black is Amazon's share of the retail media ad market. Sitting in the middle is Google's share of search advertising, and the two blue lines represent Instagram and Facebook. Those of you with really excellent eyesight will note that you can see Meta's market share in social in light gray at the very top. And I did this partly because I think it's important to understand the nature of Amazon's dominance in this channel. And also to sort of point out too that, you'll see that all of these lines are gently drifting downward. And Google at one time controlled more than 2/3 of search ad spending. Facebook on its own for a time controlled a much bigger share of the social ad spending market. But there's something that I think is unique in Amazon's circumstances, which is worth underlining, and that's Amazon Prime. So you could say, I think, for a time that Google had built a better mousetrap, and that allowed them to capture more market share than a Lycos or an Ask Jeeves, all those many years ago. And Facebook was so successful at building out a dominant network and a dominant scaled audience that allowed them to preserve their own market share. But Amazon literally has now, hundreds of millions of people who are paying, upwards of $100 a year to get free shipping. And that lock-in is, I think, going to ensure that their market share, while it will continue to drop downward, it will do so very gently and very slowly, because they have this lock-in that compels lots of people to visit their sites and spend with them week in and week out. But as I said, we are going to talk about somebody besides Amazon, and we should start really with Walmart, who, to my mind, has been one of the most under-discussed media success stories of the last several years. So in 2020, Walmart had barely crossed the $1 billion ad revenue threshold. They made, I think, $1.05 billion in ad revenue in 2020. By 2025, they're going to generate more than $6 billion in ad revenue. That means that by the end of our forecast period, there will really only be 6 companies that have bigger US ad businesses than Walmart. And those include the triopoly, as well as TikTok, Amazon, and Microsoft. So just an absolutely incredible growth story. And I guess to sort of further contextualize the size, so by next year, Walmart is going to be bigger than Pinterest and X combined. You fast forward just 1 year later, and it's going to be bigger than Pinterest, Snap, and X combined. So really just an incredible story, and a good segue into sort of who is going to be fighting over what's left when you take those two big players out of the equation. I thought a good way to sort of tell this story and refer back to some of the data that I shared earlier would be to talk about the companies that are at the moment jockeying for the very distant third place title. So up here you have the ad revenue growth projections for Instacart, for eBay, and for Target. Now, I share these three companies for a lot of different reasons, but one thing that I think that leaps out right away is just how different all these companies are. So you have a kind of digital grocery layer, you have a legacy big box retailer, and you also have a legacy e-com player. And what I think you can also notice right away is that Instacart and Target are both growing much, much faster than eBay is. And that's partly due to what I talked about earlier with rising e-com spending. The companies that are really going to sort of achieve escape velocity and drive tons and tons of revenue for themselves with retail media are the companies that are going to have lots and lots of repeat business and lots of repeat customers. It's not to say that the other players in this space, and there are lots of them, aren't going to be able to make money from retail media, but there's going to be sort of a different level of success and opportunity afforded to the folks that can really drive habit and drive week in and week out visits. So let's talk a little bit about what's, again, going to determine success for everybody, whether they're the market leaders like Amazon and Walmart or for everybody else. The main thing I think has to do with the importance and growth of offsite spending. So this is from research that the Path to Purchase Institute conducted earlier this year, where they asked a bunch of retail media advertisers which sub-channels were must-buys for them. What's notable, I think, right away is just how many of them were regarded as must-buys. 8 of the sub-channels listed here were listed as must-buy by a majority of the respondents. And notably, 4 of those 8 were offsite spending, including the leading one, which was social ad extension. Programmatic display notably came in third, with 2/3 of respondents saying that was a must-buy. And a thing that I think is also worth calling out from this data is the sub-channels that are listed near the bottom of this list. And I would submit that for things like CTV, for things like in-store signage, in-store audio, those are further down the list, not so much because of any limited efficacy, but because they are still, frankly, quite new. One of the things that you'll start to see discussed a lot and worked on quite a bit in the coming year is retailers figuring out just how to incorporate in-store signage into their store footprints and their store experiences. And as that stuff kind of gets ironed out and gets smoothed out, I think that you'll start to see more and more advertisers regard those as musts rather than nice to haves or experiments. But when you get into a world where not just 8 channels, but maybe 9 or 10 or 11 are regarded as must buy, this exacerbates a problem that has really been brewing in this channel for quite some time. And that's the challenges of complexity. The IAB surveyed a bunch of retail media advertisers earlier this year and asked them about notable issues or challenges that they faced in the ecosystem. And the thing that led far and away, nearly 7 out of 10 respondents picked it, was just reducing complexity in the ad buying process. For advertisers that are in whole hog on this channel, you might be spending your money in social platforms, on CTV, on retailers' websites, off retailers' websites, in digital audio, and coordinating all of that spending, not just internally or with your agencies, but even within the RMNs themselves, is a tremendous challenge, and one that is, I would say, at the moment, not improving right away. Those same respondents to the IAB survey also listed transparency and measurement as major issues. And these are all issues that I think, again, are things that are going to take years to iron out, not weeks or months. And that's important when you think about, again, a slide that I shared with you at the very beginning of the presentation, and just thinking about how long it's going to take to sort of iron some of these things out. I would say that, the fact that half of advertisers aren't going to increase their spending, that does also mean that half of advertisers are going to increase their spending. And that's because while there are going to be some that are going to wait around for industry level consensus or an industry-wide solution to the measurement challenges, for example, there are lots of other advertisers who are going to sort of take matters into their own hands and find solutions that work for them. And that's a good segue into the final slide I have for you guys today, which is just to talk about the opportunities. So the sort of efficacy of this channel, I think, has been pretty well established and pretty much proven out. And that just and the challenges that I've talked about leave advertisers with a choice where they can decide for themselves how to find a measurement solution or to find a standardization solution that works for them. They can figure out how to marshal their own resources to ensure that everybody is getting credit, everybody is singing from the same hymnal. And I think also the one major opportunity that lots of advertisers should be thinking about is how to move beyond the endemic relationships that they have. A lot of the spending that's come into this channel has been driven by funds that were already set aside via joint business partnerships or shopper marketing relationships. But because of the power of the data that lots of these RMNs sit on, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for advertisers to explore what's out there beyond the relationships that they have already. So that's enough out of me for now, Paul. Thanks, and back to you.
That was great, Max. Thank you. We've had some great live questions, so please keep them coming and we'll get to them shortly. But first, I'd like to bring back our special guest, Michael Greene, Senior Vice President, Global Strategy at Criteo. Welcome back, Michael.
Thanks, Paul.
So let me start with this question, Michael. Do you agree that retail media has already won? And would your answer change if we were looking at regions outside the US versus just the US?
Look, I think the numbers speak for themselves. Retail media is a clear winner in the marketing space today. That being said, as a global company working with retailers across the US, Europe, Latin America, and Asia, we do see fairly stark differences across the regions. Certainly in the US, we see the most mature retailers in the space. For many of them, retail media is not new. Whether it was part of what they'd always done in-store, moved into couponing and promotions, today highly digitized, retail media is increasingly at the core of many US retailers' businesses. As we look at other regions, however, their movement into retail media is relatively new. For a lot of those retailers, they've only launched a sponsored products or display program in the past couple of years. And they're only now really thinking about how they extend beyond maybe traditional trade and shopper marketing budgets and move into attracting the type of national media and branding dollars that are needed to really help this space reach its potential. So yes, US certainly mature. Yes, retail media clearly a winner due to its inherent value prop, but pretty big differences across the globe.
Michael, Criteo recently launched a product that's designed for both buyers and sellers in retail media. I'm curious as to why you built a two-sided product and how it solves for the fragmentation that's in the market right now.
Yeah, so just a couple months ago, we held what we called our Retail Media for All event. And Paul, as you pointed out, this was really us speaking to the industry as a whole, the need for buyers, their agencies, marketplace sellers, and the sellers of retail media, namely the retailers and marketplaces, to come together and build an ecosystem that solves some of these major challenges that I think Max has so astutely pointed out, whether that be the massive fragmentation we see in the space that exists not only across various retailers, but also increasingly across channels within these retailers, whether that be different tools for sponsored products, different tools for display, different for on-site video, and then as we move into the programmatic and off-site world, those only get more fragmented. So you have that channel expansion, but you also inherently have the retail expansion. And you multiply those things together, and you can imagine it becomes a pretty big barrier for any brand who's trying to manage this, especially on a global basis today. So one of the things that we're really aiming to do as a company right now is use technology to try to solve this and empower both brands, agencies, and retailers to work better together with the right tool sets to solve these underlying fragmentation issues. For us, this means bringing on-site retail and off-site retail media together in common technology, utilizing standardized forms of measurement across all channels and across retailers, and then bringing insights to the table to help people plan and allocate media better, all while also providing retailers the tools they need to manage their unique businesses, because this cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. Every retailer needs an ad experience that not only helps it create media revenues, but also supports its ultimate goal of the retailer, which is help consumers find the products they love and ultimately purchase them.
What do you think is holding retailers and advertisers back from implementing or investing in offsite right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me start with the retailer side, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the things I see on the brand agency side and how those are affecting investment. On the retailer side, going back to the relative maturity of so many retailers compared to, say, a behemoth like Amazon, so many retailers today are just now trying to get their own on-site businesses up to scale. And there are great reasons that they're going to focus on on-site first. Their margins are better, they control that experience end to end. There's less inherent conflict with maybe some offsite activity that's already being done by the retailer thanks to a co-op type advertising program. So for so many retailers today, offsite really feels like that next channel that they add after they feel like they've mastered onsite. And increasingly, especially here in the US, we're seeing a lot of retailers get there, and some of our most advanced retailers in Europe are certainly there as well. I expect over the next 12 months for a lot of progress to be good here. Within brands and agencies, budgeting silos play a major factor. If you look at many retail media buyers today, they stem out of things like performance advertising. Search is clearly an area that has transferred a lot of its budgets from places like Google into the retail media space. And this notion of programmatic style buying is simply very new to them, and clarity around budget and executional ownership is unclear. Does this sit with the retail media team? Does this sit with the broader commerce team? Does offsite sit with things like programmatic or CTV buying teams? These are all conflicts that brands and their agents figure out today. And they're being, how do they build consolidated teams? Because one thing that we've seen in our own data is when you start planning and executing offsite and onsite strategies together, the performance gains are immense and have material impacts on overall ROAS as well as conversion rates. So the benefits are there, but there's some structural factors that are still holding them up.
The last question, Michael, before we move on to live Q&A, if you could wave a wand and change one thing about retail media today, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is most challenging, especially when you look outside of Amazon that has, let's face it, very little of the legacy of the traditional trade and shopper marketing space, is how you balance the retailer's desire to grow these new incremental retail media revenue streams with this legacy of trade and shopper and its still very meaningful importance to organizations. Oftentimes, these things feel like they can come in conflict, not only in sense of, hey, I don't want to take budget from one pocket and just put it in the other. I want to grow the overall pie. How do I do that best? But also can create some internal silo issues, not just within brands and their agencies, as I just described, as we talked about offsite, but also within retailers as you see battles between RMN teams, marketing teams, merchant teams for control of this overall budget. I think we're making major progress in this area, but still oftentimes some of these legacy ways of working, some of these legacy processes can stand in the way of the innovation and standardization that we need to see in this space.
Well, thanks for that, Michael. And we're now up to audience Q&A. So we've gotten a lot of great questions, and I'm going to start with this one. This one's for you, Max. Snap just announced Amazon shoppable ads, and more alliances are forming between big and small walled gardens. So the question, is this being driven by retail media, or is there a retail media component?
I think it's being driven more than anything by the retailers trying their best to keep abreast of changing consumer behavior. When I first saw that story, it reminded me a lot of a viral tweet that went out maybe a couple of years ago of someone saying, "I don't Google, I TikTok." I think that retailers are intensely aware of the fact that the ways that people shop, the way that people do research, the way that people think about and discover new products is changing all the time. And Amazon is trying its best to sort of make sure that it doesn't get disintermediated or fall behind on that change in consumer adoption curve. And naturally, as these partnerships get borne out, it's going to be really important for retailers to sort of keep abreast of it. So that to me feels like the main motivating factor here, and one reason why I think retail media is going to be poised to continue growing so healthily.
Another one for you, Max, and this one comes with a lot of quotation marks. So I think
Love those.
You talked about shopper marketing budgets a little bit, and the question is, to what degree, and I'm going to do the air quotes, to what degree is spending driven by retailers requiring a brand to spend in order to be on the shelf? So I think you get where I'm coming from, or where the caller is coming from.
I do indeed. I mean, look, like the reality is that there are probably millions of shopper marketing relationships that are informing a lot of the spending that's happened in the channel. But I do think that that spending has essentially sort of provided a gateway to a much wider universe of spending and activation possibilities, which is what you're starting to see in the data that I unpacked a little bit. I don't want to sort of minimize or act as though that those relationships aren't a part of this, and there is frankly a lingering sense of that among lots of retailers. One of the things that I looked at in the H1 version of my forecast report was the sort of sense that a lot of advertisers do sort of perceive this to be a tax. But I think that sense sort of diminishes as more advertisers start to sort of understand what's possible within this channel, above and beyond just making sure that they're at the top of the search results when someone searches in their category on a retailer's website, for example.
For the next question, I'd like to get insights from both of you, starting with you, Michael, and it's a two-parter. So I've taken the liberty of combining two questions. The first one is, with so many retailers launching retail media networks, do you think there could be a shakeout? The other part of that is, do you foresee RMNs merging similar to the way CTV streaming services have done to provide more coverage for advertisers and access to more audiences? So I guess it's the sort of consolidation, fragmentation, shakeout kind of question. So I know that's a lot to unpack, but I know you guys are more than up to the task. So Michael, you're up.
Yeah, so I think at the heart of this is, yes, fragmentation remains an issue as more and more retailers enter this game. It only exacerbates those fragmentation issues. I think maybe different than what we've seen in other media channels. I don't necessarily see a lot of retailers merging their businesses for the sake of retail media. Retail media is meaningful revenue stream for a lot of these retailers, but let's face it, their core business is still distributing goods to customers at the end of the day, and that's the core of their offering. What I do see happening though is more and more retailers looking to embrace ways to make that their offerings more interoperable with each other. And there are a few different ways that this has happened in the industry today. One is through technology platforms such as ourselves, right, that provide relatively standardized ways of buying across retailers. And I expect to see retailers more and more trying to seek out these network effects, right? I want to be part of an ecosystem where there are a lot of other retailers like me, and a lot of brands are already buying, so we can lift all boats and make it easier for people to buy and sell. But there are also really important things that exist outside of technology here. I think one thing to point out is a lot of the work that's being done with the IAB today around standardization, around measurement, as well as ad formats. This is something that happened very early in the days of digital advertising and was really critical to its growth. There's clearly a need and room for that in the retail media space as well. And I think greater collaboration across retailers and brands on these standardization metrics helps solve for a lot of those fragmentation problems. So simplify workflows, get people in common technology, work on standardized metrics with, where it makes sense, standardized ad formats. I think that goes a long way to taking care of a lot of the pain that advertisers feel today.
Yeah,
Max,
I would say that
anything to add there? Sorry, go ahead.
No. I think Michael touched on most of the key points. I guess the only thing that I would add is that I think the sort of timeline for any kind of consolidation, or maybe a retailer deciding to just wash their hands of it and join up with like a citrus ad or something like that, is probably years away rather than a couple of quarters. If you take out an anomaly like Gap, which sort of got in and then got out of retail media really quickly, I think for a lot of advertisers, or excuse me, a lot of RMNs, just the novelty of having this relatively high margin income coming in is going to be really, there's going to be a lot of temptation to just sort of see how far everyone can take it on their own before deciding, maybe it's easier if we just kind of let someone else take the reins here. So I think that to the extent that there will be consolidation, it may take quite a while for a lot of the reasons that Michael's already laid out.
Michael, you mentioned measurement, which I think is coming up on the radar as a big priority in the next year. A question here is about incrementality testing and why hasn't it been more widely adopted in the RMN space to help navigate some of those measurement challenges?
Why hasn't it been more
Yes.
widely adopted? I think one, incrementality measurement for many companies that don't have a huge technology backbone to support it is hard and very resource consuming. Second thing is when it comes to incrementality measurement, nobody actually agrees by and large on the correct methodology. And there's a ton of work that needs to be done around standardization, or at least a common core set of principles for conducting incrementality measurement, so more technology can be built around it. It's something we support natively through one methodology in our platform today. But I'll tell you, countless brands come to us and say, we have a different way of wanting to look at this. How can you support that? And that requires a lift to be able to do. And I think the third reason people don't do it more is, quite frankly, it's scary, right? It's one thing if you have a great history of ROAS to say, I can rely upon that, and I know people at the point of purchase are going to convert. It's another thing to say, hey, I've got the tools, the optimization, increasingly the AI capabilities, optimize that towards what's truly incremental. That's something we're trying to solve in the industry right now through our technology, but it can be a scary leap for people that have used a different metric to judge success, especially on the retailer side, to start transacting and optimizing against this new, oftentimes more difficult to reach incrementality metric.
And we have time for one last question. And Max, I'll give you the last word. I know Michael just mentioned AI, the buzzword of the year by far. So Max, will generative AI play a role in retail media search?
I think it absolutely will, but it's going to take, I think, a fairly long amount of time for it to really unfold. There's the science fiction future scenario where, somebody visits an Amazon or a Walmart or a Kroger and starts putting things in, and then all of a sudden, instead of just working down their shopping list, they're having a conversation with, the AI, the grocer's specific AI about what they need, and also if you're making eggplant parmesan, you should probably also have a starter, and we happen to sell artichoke hearts. They're on sale right now, and so you should do this. And I think that it's not inconceivable that that's where we wind up, but a lot of different boxes need to be ticked for that to be where we wind up. So I guess the overly simple answer is absolutely, but it's going to take a minute.
Great. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks again to Max for joining us, and a very special thank you to Michael and to the team at Criteo. Our II studio crew and the eMarketer production team also deserve a huge thank you for making this and every other webinar we do possible. As promised, we'll be emailing you a link to today's slides along with a full recording of the session, so keep an eye out for that. Before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for more live Analyst and Tech Talk webinars on our events page at eMarketer.com/events. On the audio side of the house, don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast. And finally, please check out our newsletters. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.